All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Gabriel tuning in here from our Cornell campus, and glad you could join us this afternoon. And I know that we had a lot of signups, which is great for the webinar. I will be recording this and posting it, and I'll send out the link to the list so folks can access that later or share it. So we had over 70 people express interest in joining, which is great. Really happy this afternoon to be able to share the stories of a couple growers who are just getting into the shiitake business, and we can kind of hear some of their experiences. I think the more we learn and share and hear everyone's slightly different experience of this, the better we can all increase our ability to grow these mushrooms and enjoy them. And hopefully have our viable little enterprises as well as on our farms. So just as a little background, I think most folks know that this project has stemmed out of a 2-year grant through the USDA Specialty Crop Block grant program. It's administered by the New York Farm Viability Institute. And both those entities are interested in advancing what they consider specialty crops and advancing viable businesses in New York. I've been involved at Cornell for about the past 8 years. And most of my work originally was field work, looking at some of the different parameters for production. And we didn't anticipate either the demand or interest in growing, but also in the need to develop sort of the business side of things. So, and I found this as I started farming myself, that I really was focused on the technical aspects of how to grow something and do it well. But I think equally as important are sort of these aspects of business management and marketing and product development and all these kind of things that often aren't the reasons that folks get into farming, but are really important reasons if you want to stay into farming. They're things we have to focus on. So we'll hear from a couple growers today. I hope to do this again later in the summer with a couple other folks. So if that's something you're interested in sharing your story and where you're at in your progress, I'd love to do that. You could always shoot me an email and let me know of that interest, because again, I think these are valuable teaching moments for us all to engage with. I'm just going to give a couple updates to the group as a whole, which I would consider participants in the workshops that we've done in 2018 as well as 2017. But even further than that, we've had just hundreds of people go through our workshops, whether that's a weekend workshop we often call Camp Mushroom, to one of our online courses that we offer in mushroom cultivation, to any kind of other interface we've had. So welcome. It's nice to see some old names and faces, and we'll continue the conversation, certainly. As a reminder, we do have a listserv. There are instructions, and I'll make sure that folks are aware of how to connect to that listserv. It is a place that anyone who's a part of that listserv can post and share information, ask questions, get tips and tricks, maybe find a lead on a supplier of logs or of spawn or something like that. So we do have that tool to keep you all connected, and we will be continuing to convene events here and there as we go. So a couple things about this project. We did 2 rounds of trainings. We had over 500 participants in those trainings in total over the 2 years. We've done a number of kind of one-on-one outreach calls and discussions and offered some support in that capacity. We're also developing a number of different resources to expand what we currently have available for those interested in getting into mushroom cultivation. So and all this has been done with my sort of leadership in the context of the Cornell Small Farms Program, which our team has our fingers in a lot of different avenues. Beginning farmer training, we work with veterans in agriculture, we do research on reduced tillage, we connect with other agroforestry practices like our maple sugaring program, grazing, livestock information and extension work. So we're kind of all over the place within the small farm world. And this is just one aspect of that. So and I'm part-time at Cornell. I do have a small farm myself, and in my part-time capacity, I'm doing my best to keep up with this wonderful, exciting level of demand and interest that we see. I get inquiries almost every day. And that's not just from potential growers in New York, but from all over the country, as well as from universities and extensions, and even internationally, because mushrooms are this interesting specimen, this interesting organism that people want to know a lot about, and there's not a lot of great information out. So I appreciate your patience. I appreciate your enthusiasm, and encourage you to certainly reach out if you have questions or are looking for resources, and just know that you're in my queue if I haven't gotten back to you, and I'm doing my best to keep up. So maybe someday we'll have a full-time team of mushroom staff here, but it's certainly been really fun to see, and challenging sometimes to keep up with all the great questions coming in. So today I'll just go through a couple pieces of the project and what we're working on right now, just to kind of give you a heads up of what's coming in the coming months. And then we'll turn it over to our presenters, who will share about their farm enterprises. And the goal of this is to just hear from them and ask your questions as you go, as they come up. And again, you can do that in the chat panel. You can type those in at any time. So a couple updates. So starting next week, we are rolling out what is a series of training sessions. I should say training, not trading. I can actually edit that right now, which is nice. So training sessions. And we're basically rolling these out one per week, starting next week through the end of September. Some folks participated last summer. We did a series of webinars on these topics. Found it really challenging to get folks to be able to attend a series of webinars in the summer. It's just a really busy time. And so this year we've kind of switched the format, and we've worked to refine these down to shorter videos, presentations, and some activities and some information. And so these different topic areas are something we'll start rolling out next week. And our goal is that folks can access them anytime. You don't have to have a login. It's just going to be posted at cornellmushrooms.org. You can view the video, you can work through the activity, and then if you want, you can submit that activity for feedback from, from us and from some of our grower advisors in the project. So those will be starting, and you can look forward to those coming out. Different topics, as you can see here, everything from thinking about aspects of business management to things like management of forests and how that relates to this type of enterprise. Mushroom identification is something that many people have asked for more information on. That lesson is going to focus on identification for the major mushroom species that we can cultivate. It's not going to get into the whole breadth of mushroom ID, which is thousands and thousands of species and much more complex. So we're going to keep it simple to the ones that you can grow, so that we make sure everyone is on the same page and able to just be assured that what they're growing is what they're selling. And in the last lesson, we'll also talk about some of the ways that we see farms diversifying and fitting shiitake into their mixed operations, and talk about some of the advantages of that. So I'm excited to roll those out, excited for that to be available. It's taken a bit longer. We'd hoped to release them earlier in the summer, but we actually just took a step back and wanted to make sure the quality was there and the production value was good, and so we delayed that a bit. But those will continue to be available at cornellmushrooms.org for years to come. Second thing we're updating, if you took a training in the last couple of years, we gave you a handout that was a guidebook that essentially walked through all the aspects of shiitake production post-production, meaning after you harvest the mushrooms, basically taking them from harvest to your markets. And so this has been a living document that's gone through several revisions now. We're starting to hone in on something that's somewhat final. And we're seeing this as a companion to the guidebook on the left, which was developed from a previous grant-funded program, where that guidebook really is about managing the mushrooms themselves, from harvesting the logs, acquiring spawn, and actually producing mushrooms. So basically what we're doing now is creating this companion guide, which takes them from the harvest point to the market. So that'll be coming out as a final guide with nice pretty pictures and professional layout sometime, we're hoping in mid to late September. So we're working with a graphic designer now to refine that. And we're also going to re-release the original guide to best management practices with a couple updates and some changes, because it's been sort of in a stagnant mode, and there's some things to change in there as well. So look forward to those things coming in the early fall this year. Another exciting kind of development that we've been working on this summer is production of some more videos. If you're not familiar, we have a lot of videos about the basics of many of the forms of outdoor production. We've updated the basic inoculation video, and that's going to be released hopefully in the next couple of weeks here. And then we're also expanding what we're offering to bridge the gap between outdoor cultivation and cultivation in controlled environment spaces. That can look like a lot of different types of spaces, from high tunnels and greenhouses to retrofitted basements and warehouses to grow houses that are specifically designed for mushrooms. We're starting to see a lot of demand and interest in that, and so we're moving into that avenue a bit and starting to share information about what that could look like. And in many ways, oyster mushrooms are the primary candidate when we're looking at those systems, at least to start, because they're the easiest to grow. So we're going to be releasing a number of videos and kind of expanding our resources to look at that aspect of production. So if that's something that excites or interests you, or you're curious about, then you can look forward to that information coming out also in the early fall. And so finally, we are going to make some updates to our website as well. And I mention all these things just to kind of keep you posted. Also as an encouragement that if you have feedback or things that you're looking for and have had a hard time finding, I'd love to hear about that, so that as we're making these changes, we can best serve our audience. So feel free to let me know what that could look like. Our website's going to mostly look the same, although I've received word that our small farm program in general website is gonna kind of be modernized and updated. So I don't know what the final look will be, but it'll provide very much the same information. The how-to page, focusing on our printed and video resources. Identification is going to get kind of an upgrade. We're going to really expand out those resources to help people build their skills around mushroom identification. We're going to have a whole section kind of expanded around the economics and include some of the budget models that we've been working on and trying to update. And so the website's kind of getting these little tweaks. It, by and large, will have the same information, but we'll try to kick it up a notch and provide that for you. So these are kind of things that are all happening simultaneously. I'm trying to juggle all of these, and again, I expect an early fall release for many of them, but we'll certainly keep you apprised as they emerge. So as I sent out in the email, which is how most of you maybe found out about the webinar, although there might be some folks joining us from other avenues, we really want to hear and learn about folks who've been in contact with us and find out where you're up to, and potentially any updates to your production since we last connected. Specifically, if you're a veteran in New York and you're in mushroom cultivation, we really want to capture that information. We've received funding from New York State to work specifically with veterans in agriculture, and so I was just talking to Dean, who coordinates that program at our office, and what we're going to do is, once we have that information captured, is we're going to get those folks together and figure out what the group has most interest in, and how we can leverage some of the support the state has offered us to support veterans that are doing mushroom cultivation. So if you fall in that category, or if you're an immediate family member as a veteran, please do fill that out, and then we can keep in touch and figure out what those next steps are. Anyone who is actively cultivating mushrooms, and specifically we're focused today on the shiitakes, outdoor cultivation, we'd love to hear how you're doing, what you're doing, and it doesn't matter where you're at, doesn't matter what scale you're at, doesn't matter if you've wildly exceeded your expectations or if you've fallen short of what you'd hoped to do since you took a class with us or something. We just want to hear and track what's happening for folks, and we ask a question on how we can continue to help. So our carrot for that. It really is a 5-minute survey, I promise, unless you write lots of comments in the last question, which you're welcome to do. But we are going to give away some gift certificates to mushroom supply companies as a bit of an incentive to get that survey into us. And that is asking for that by August 1st. So the links are there. When I follow up with the link from this webinar, I will also include this information. So just appreciate that. Really helpful for us both to share back with USDA about what's going on, and also just to kind of gauge our effectiveness and know where to head next with mushrooms. So I'll just, as we transition, show a nice picture. This is a grower picture, one of their first flushes of mushrooms. I think I showed it at a number of the workshops that I taught. Just a really great example. Hopefully at the end of the day, what we're all about is producing these beautiful mushrooms and getting them out to our customers. And so despite some of the ups and downs, there's been some conversation on the listserv about people finding some variation in their production cycles, and sometimes when it's hot or it's dry or it's too wet, you know, I'm out this morning picking slugs off the logs, all those fun things. But at the end of the day, it's a really fun process, and I know you all are on that same page with me. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mariann, who's going to share with us about her enterprise. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Mariann, you should be able to unmute yourself, or I can unmute you, and share your presentation.
Okay. So hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
Sounds great.
Good. Also, I'm also in one of these people in a place with poor internet connection, so I'm actually connected through my cell phone right now. It should work fine, but if I go blank or quiet in the middle, maybe Steve or Dyami, you can pick up there while I try to reconnect. So we have Wintonbury Farm. We organized as an LLC. This is Mariann talking. My husband Richard and I started Shiitake Mushroom Enterprise really last summer. And here we go. So we purchased this farm. We're over in Jefferson County. We purchased the farm in 2014. We're both foresters. My husband has a significant amount of logging experience. We both presently work full-time off the farm. So I do some college teaching and have a little more free time in the summers. My husband works with conservation easements with the DEC, and we have 2 boys, teenagers. And the farm itself is about 174 acres. We have mostly hay and pasture, maybe 30 acres of woods. We have some hemlock groves where we conduct our shiitake, it's where our shiitake laying yard is. Around us, we mostly have, this is big dairy country here, and some beef cattle. And as far as an operation, we personally are very limited in terms of finances, equipment, time. Once we bought the farm, that pretty much did us in financially. So we're kind of going in low end to an extent. So this is a kind of an overview of the north half of the farm. Our house is over here, and we have a barn here, which is where we inoculate our logs. And then our laying yard is up in these. You can sort of see this darker green. That's our hemlock grove. So that's where we do our production. And it's about maybe a half a mile from the barns out to where our laying yard is. Why shiitakes? We chose to do this. I went to a workshop that I think it might have actually even have been in 2014 up in St. Lawrence County, and brought home my inoculated log. And that was really my first experience with how to actually inoculate and grow the mushrooms. I took an online webinar through Co-op Extension, and it was on the economics of shiitakes that Steve Gabriel had put on. And it seemed like something we could reasonably do given our limited resources at the farm. We have land, we have hemlock groves, we have access to logs, we have access to the equipment to harvest the logs. There's a summer production schedule which fits okay with my work schedule. We're close to the Thousand Islands region, so we have a number of sort of high-end restaurants that cater to the seasonal tourist market. And so that seemed reasonable and a good way for us to start actually earning some money on the farm. There was also maybe a why not, which is that we had, in fact, none of us had ever actually tried shiitake mushrooms before we started growing them. I had done a business plan through Co-op Extension, and one of the risks that the business plan, the people that were helping with that, one of the risks they pointed out was that there is in fact this relatively long time from when you initially invest in inoculating logs to production. So in our case, we were probably 650 logs into inoculation before we ever had our first harvest that we could sell. And then I guess the other issue for me is just this actually requires talking to people and working with people, and I'm a bit more of an introvert, so having to reach out and make phone calls to people trying to sell something is really not one of my strengths. But nonetheless, we went ahead and started. So what we did, again, I just mentioned I did the business plan through the Small Farms Program, and that was very helpful in terms of thinking about strategies, marketing, and starting to pencil out the economics and the cash flow. I referenced the Shiitake BMP manual that Steve just showed. We referenced that a lot, actually. And then we have an earlier version of the economic viability workbook as well. And of course, there was the webinar. And so those were resources that I referenced heavily, and we inoculated again. We've got 650 logs last year, plus we have what we inoculated this spring. And I went to a Shiitake Viability workshop also with Steve Gabriel. I think that one was up at Paul Smith's back in January of 2017. So that was right before we actually started producing mushrooms. So just some pictures. We harvest all of our logs locally. This is my husband harvesting some bolts on our farm, and the boys out helping. This is over in our barn where we do our inoculating. This is our inoculation table. It's super clean because this is before we had ever inoculated any logs, and we were still smiling at that point. And after we got into a lot of logs, it's a little monotonous after a while. This log is way too long also. I have probably moved this log in and out of the soaking tank and the fruiting racks 3 or 4 times by now. I know it, and if I were doing this again, I would cut the end off of that log. So we're drilling here, inoculating, waxing. This is all pretty standard for the log inoculation. When we first started, we do tag every log. When we first started, we actually kept a record. Each log had its own number. We knew the species of log, the species of inoculum that we were using, the date that it was inoculated. But at this point, we've moved basically to we don't try to keep a record anymore. We do tag every log with the year and what strain of inoculum we use, and that's pretty much it, because this individual log tracking is not anything at all feasible to continue to do over time. Our laying yard, again, is out in that hemlock grove, so there's just a winter shot of that. And here we are this spring when we went out and collected more logs for inoculation. Forcing our logs, so we have a big stock tank that comfortably holds probably 30 to 35 logs. We supplement that with a smaller tank that can hold maybe 15 or 20 logs. And we haul our water in. This is well water that we bring in from down by the house. So we haul out a tank of water every week for our soaking. Our fruiting racks, these are just something we put together. We have, we just use some pieces of lumber, and then we had these pieces of steel pipe that came out of the barn. That was an old dairy barn, and the steel pipe, we basically just run it through some holes drilled on the end of some 2x8s, and then we have some uprights here to hold things together. And so that works pretty nicely for fruiting racks. Keeping them off the ground, for us is pretty essential. It really helps to minimize some of the issues with slugs and insects. Our first year, we had a lot of these little black insects. I think they're thrips. They get up inside the gills of the mushrooms. And last year, I remember spending a lot of time knocking them out. This year, we have a whole lot of spiders that are living on the logs, and they're kind of different varieties of what looks like daddy longlegs, but I've found them several times now eating those little bugs. So I'm encouraged by that there seems to be some natural predators at work on those little insects. We do protect the logs. Usually we'll give them a couple days, 3 days maybe, and then once we see some pinning, we'll put fruiting blankets over them. And if we have rain, we'll tarp them. Then, you know, depending on the time of year and the temperature conditions, production will happen, you know, early in the season. So one of our issues is early in the season when we're still particularly having cool nights, it can take up to 2 weeks for the logs to fruit. And for us, that's an issue because we're trying to soak our next batch of logs before the first one's fruited yet. So we run out of space on the fruiting rack. So we've had some issues there. This time of year, now that we're getting into 80s during the day, and I don't even know if it drops into the 70s a whole lot at night, they're coming on really fast. So this morning I had harvested 22 pounds, and we only soaked the logs last Tuesday and Wednesday. So less than a week really, and almost all of them have come on. So just trying to kind of anticipate what the temperature conditions are going to be seems to matter in terms of the production. We harvest, and I collect these in these plastic bins I just got at Sam's Club, but they work pretty nicely. And packaging, I just use brown paper bags. I do have some labels I had made up through, I think it's called Discount Grower Labels, something. I could look that up if anyone's interested, but the labels are nice, and then we can put the date and the weight on them. I try and get these packaged and delivered as soon as possible after harvest. We usually do 3 pound and 5 pound batches. Mostly I'm delivering to restaurants right now. I do work with a food cooperative down in Clayton, and so we will, if I'm working with them, I can take smaller amounts and weigh them because they have a certified scale. If I'm packaging something like pints or clamshells at home, I just put the volume on it because I do not have a certified scale at home. Some of our challenges, again, the biggest challenge for me is just selling stuff because I have to talk to people. So you have to kind of be a salesperson and cold call and just say, hi, I have mushrooms. Are you interested? A lot of times I'll offer a sample, some recipes. I do all of our deliveries right now. We have no on-farm pickups. And I haven't really engaged in any direct sales, mostly because I just don't have time or energy to go to a farmer's market when the only thing I have is some shiitake mushrooms. So I haven't done a lot with that. I'm pretty much doing the restaurants right now. I think it's important to keep good records. So right now there's really kind of 4 aspects to my record keeping. So I have one sheet where I record production. So every time I come in, so this morning, for example, I will have written down the date, how many pounds I harvested, and the batch number. And the batch number is simply, I think we have 7 stacks or 7 groups going right now. So it's, you know, which group number I'm harvesting from. I also, when I start to package them for sale, I also have a separate sheet where I track that. And again, I'll indicate the packing date, how many are in the package, and then I also record the batch number, and oftentimes I'll also track the harvest date with those. And that's all associated with an invoice number. The invoice number is written on the bag, and that way I can track, if I need to track back to if there's an issue and where those mushrooms came from, I can do that. That same number from the bags then goes on to my invoicing system in QuickBooks, which allows me to know who got which batch when, and again, and then I can track back in case I need to figure out where those mushrooms came from. And it also allows me to track payments from buyers. Last year I did a lot of, in QuickBooks you can do either a receipt or an invoice, and the receipts I've learned to only do those if I know that I'm going to get cash at the moment of delivery from the buyer. Otherwise, I use the invoices, because with the invoicing system, you have to go back in once you receive payment and indicate the payment was received. So that's actually a nice sort of a check system to make sure that I'm keeping track of all the payments. And then I also have a sheet where we just record how much time we spend doing different things. So for example, this morning it took me probably 2.5 hours to go out and harvest those 22 pounds and then get back in. I guess some other challenges that we have is just trying to keep ahead of the harvest, sell what we have before the next batch is coming in, ideally. And depending on the week and if I got out there in time to harvest, we oftentimes will have sort of these second quality mushrooms that I'm not really comfortable selling as top quality to restaurants. I have started to put those into a group called seconds or food service quality, and I'm starting to find buyers for those now as well. So there is a market. It's not going to be quite as much as what I'm getting for the nice quality ones, but I think it's important to have that market going as well. I've looked a little bit at certifications. So there's certified naturally grown, there's organic certifications, and right now the time and the cost are a bit of an issue. There's also, I think, a significant amount of record keeping. I am looking at GAPS certification, however, because I think that's important to be able to demonstrate that we're following sanitary handling practices and keeping everything food safe. So I have started to put together a food safety plan and have talked a little bit to the USDA folks that do the GAP certification. So we may be pursuing that this year yet. Finding logs is always a concern. Marketing, I've already mentioned. Keeping the family motivated to help, particularly in inoculation, really, just because, again, that's somewhat monotonous. A little bit on our production in 2017. So that was our first season producing, and that would have been the first logs that we inoculated in 2016. We soaked about 40 pounds a week. At the end of the season, I figure that we produced around 290 pounds. We sold about 190. The other, roughly 100 logs, I dried a lot of them, we ate a lot of them, we cooked with a lot of them, but a lot of them were that second quality ones that I wasn't comfortable selling to restaurants. And so we're trying to decrease the amount of unsold mushrooms by developing some markets for those second quality ones. And so far we're having pretty good success with that. Restaurants in particular really seem to like the second quality ones if they're going to be chopping them up and cooking with them. In this season, of course, we're about halfway through the season. We just started our second round of soakings on our 7 groups of logs. And so now we're up to about 75 to 80 logs per week. We're bringing in around 25 to 30 pounds per week. And I was concerned that I was going to have trouble selling them this year because it's more than we were producing last year. But so far, it's been working pretty well. So one thing we did this season, as far as the marketing and sales, this was really important for us, was to get a large refrigerator that could handle all of the bins of mushrooms that we're bringing in. Keeping these mushrooms at a good cold temperature is critical to being able to hold them and keep them at good quality until we get them out to our buyers. So this was kind of a big purchase for us, but it's turned out to be just critical to us being able to grow the operation. So we're presently supplying 4 restaurants, a farm market, and a food co-op. And this is where things get a little sketchy because we have really only a couple of the restaurants that are doing a weekly standing order. And that's really important because that way I know that I have a certain amount that I know is going to be sold each week. And then what I start to do is call the other restaurants or text them, contact the farm market, contact the food co-op with what I have left. And so far, mostly I've been able to sell, well, pretty much everything. And I've actually had the last 2 weeks, I haven't been able to supply everything that people have been asking for. So I think that's good, but I still feel like it's such a balancing act because what if someone hadn't wanted another 9 pounds of mushrooms last week. Like I didn't have another buyer lined up. So I feel like it's, you know, this balancing act, and to some extent it just seems to be, you know, maybe luck, but again, making contacts and calling people and sending out texts and trying to sort of grow our presence, I think is going to be important in that. And again, this last point here about finding buyers for those second quality ones has also turned out to be really important. The restaurants do appreciate having that, you know, a little bit less expensive product that when they're chopping it up and putting it into different, you know, recipes, that has been working pretty well. So we've actually been selling those without too much difficulty. Other things as far as marketing, I've got, you know, we are using social media. I do have a website, but I'm finding it's really hard to maintain the website because we have such poor internet connection here at home. So I've tried to back off the website and make it a little bit more generic, and I'm doing more of our dynamic marketing through social media. So I use Facebook and Instagram. I post pictures when we are harvesting, or if there's a cool bug or bird or something in the fruiting or out in the laying yard, I'll put that out there. I've started doing some little short, you know, maybe 30-second videos of what the laying yard looks like or what the soaking process is, and those get a lot of views on Facebook. I have done a few Facebook promotions because, and I think this is a thing that we're seeing more now with Facebook, is that your feed isn't necessarily visible right away to all of your followers. It depends on how often they click as to how often they'll actually see your feed. So one way around that is to do these Facebook promotions where for a few dollars they promote it to a larger audience, and you can sort of target that audience. And so I have done that a few times. It does get more views. I don't have any evidence right now that it actually leads to more sales. And what I've tried to do is I'll tag partner businesses. So if I drop some mushrooms off at a restaurant, I'll tag the restaurant's Facebook page and say, hey, we just delivered here. And then I might promote that, that particular post, and just to try and leverage that a little bit. So at any rate, the Facebook promotions is still, I'm still kind of evaluating that as a marketing tool. And we're just going to continue to try to add logs to the operation, continue to try to build our restaurant sales and wholesale markets, sort of looking for direct marketing opportunities through something like a CSA. But again, a farmer's market is really, it's a maybe, because I don't think that's a good use of my time to spend a whole day trying to sell just mushrooms. We do have a regional food hub that is in its sort of development stages here in the serving St. Lawrence, Jefferson, Oswego, and Lewis, I think, counties. It seems to be kind of going with fits and starts, but if they do get that going, that will be a tremendous help in being able to move these around a little bit more. I've also started investigating some value-added products. Particularly, I'd like to do some, I've had some requests for shelf-stable or sort of a canned product, but that's still a bit of a mystery to me and one I haven't had time to delve into. And there's also this potential opportunity to sell inoculated bolts at, say, a festival, and I also have not pursued that a great deal at this point. And that's about all I have. I do want to acknowledge the support of the Cornell, Steve Gabriel, all the folks over there, and the support being provided. You know, we've certainly taken advantage of the one-on-one, some of the other support provided through the SARE grant and the crop block grant. So I appreciate that, and that's all I have.
Great, thank you, Mariann. I'll encourage folks who are in the room here, if they have any questions or comments, you can enter them in the chat box. And again, if you haven't opened up the chat box, you should see it at the bottom of the screen. Or if you're in full screen mode, you may need to scroll the mouse to the top or bottom to find it. And sometimes it's under the More option in the menu. But if there's any comments or questions, we'll pause for a minute here, and then we'll go to our next speaker. I guess, Mariann, I'm curious if you are willing to share some of the prices you get from restaurants for the firsts versus the seconds. What are you seeing in your area?
Yeah, so this is getting interesting. So what I'm doing this year is if someone will come on a stand for restaurants, right? So for a standing order with restaurants, I'm getting $12 a pound. If it's a restaurant that just wants to, get them once in a while, if, they might contact me and say, hey, we'd like 3 pounds this week, then I'm going with $13 a pound there. So really trying to encourage the standing orders. Now with the second quality ones, what I did is I put those, so I'm asking $10 a pound for those. And again, I've got, the one restaurant that, actually 2 restaurants that are happy to take those. And then I had an interesting thing where my farm market, which so the farm market sells, it's basically a group of maybe 8 farmers that all market through this one big farm stand. And my thought was, what I've been doing is giving them the mushrooms wholesale, so it's the same as I do with restaurants, but then they will of course mark it up at their farm stand, and what they mark it up to comes out to about $15 a pound, which is about reasonable for around here for the direct sale. So I thought that was fine, but then they contacted me from the farm market last week, and a restaurant in that area had come in and bought out all their mushrooms and wanted more. So now I'm trying to figure out how to work around, because if I'm working with restaurants, I would prefer to work directly with them and not be going through a third-party farm market. So that's interesting. But I ran out of mushrooms last week, and the farm market folks did indicate that the restaurant up there would take the second quality ones if I could get those up there. So, but yeah, so about $12 and then $10 for the seconds.
Great. And there's a question from Jillian. She's wondering how well your mushrooms keep in the clamshell containers. Do you get adequate shelf life from them?
I do not love clamshell containers at all, honestly. The shelf life, and one of the things that happens with the clamshells is that those typically are going to someone like a food co-op. I've also tried to work a little bit with some other local markets, and I don't think the short answer is I don't think the shelf life is good. I used a vented clamshells, and that's important just to keep because the condensation will immediately start to collect on the inside of those, and what you don't want is the wet mushrooms. One place that I was taking those to had them sitting out on a produce stand, not refrigerated. And so I popped in there about 2 days after I dropped off mushrooms, and they looked awful, and they had, of course, my sticker on them. So I talked to them about if they could find a refrigerated place, and we ended up not working further with them, not because they're not willing to work with us, but I think it would take a little more effort to get them kept refrigerated. So I think so I don't love the clamshells because the mushrooms get wet. And even if they're in the clamshells, they still have to be kept cold in order to maintain their quality.
Great. Well, I think we'll shift over and share Dyami's presentation. And then if there's more questions or anything that comes up, folks are welcome to keep adding to the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on it. I did post a couple links in the chat box. Mariann mentioned the online business course that's run by a farmer and one of our extension folks, where you do walk through over 6 weeks the process of actually writing a business plan, which can be helpful to have that feedback. That's offered in the usually late winter, early spring. And then I also put the link in for growers discount labels, which I know a lot of farms have used just as one option for getting your labels for different products. So those are in the chat box if you're interested. Let's if you want to stop sharing, and Dyami, you can share your screen. See if we can flip those.
All right. Can you hear me okay, Steve?
Yep, sounds great.
All right, cool. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm calling in from High Falls, New York. Our farm is High Falls Farm. Let's see. I'm going to click right over to our map so you can take a look, big picture, at our farm. We are in year 2 of stewarding this old apple orchard that you can see a picture of here. We're in the center of High Falls. The farm itself is almost bigger than the town. So it's an old orchard. We're transitioning it to biological management from years of kind of conventional management, kind of conventional mismanagement. It's overgrown. And there's about 10 acres of hardwood forest on the farm. And so being dear friends and colleagues with Steve, and having done, some small scale shiitake inoculation for a number of years via permaculture, sorry, my baby is actually crying in the background with her grandma. It's a little distracting. Sorry, everybody. So we were excited to scale up a shiitake enterprise and give it a try. So you can see in the back corner is our house, and the log yard is not so far away. That was key for us, and we were pleased that the land is laid out in such a way that we could get our log yard kind of close to our house, so that we're able to bring an extension cord out there to do inoculation right in the yard. So that walking over to the yard to check on the status of the flush is, just a 2-minute walk, which is really great for us. So we started in the spring of 2017 after taking Steve's winter course, his first year of running the training courses. And we started, we're basically working toward a 1,000 log operation is the plan. We are doing 250 logs each year to work up to a 1,000 log operation. Then in year 5, we'll be replacing the first 250 with another 250 logs. We additionally are doing, last year we did 50 shiitake logs and 50 oyster logs to sell at holiday markets. So I will talk a little bit more about that. So year 1, we were inoculating 350 logs in the log yard. We are harvesting kind of a small percentage of the logs from the forest. It is mixed hardwood forest, so there's a good amount of oak that can be harvested from our hardwood forest, which is really great. I have a business partner in the shiitake enterprise who isn't my husband. My husband and I, High Falls Farm is our larger business, and then my friend Krista Marshall and I run the shiitake enterprise together. And her son happens to do ecological forestry management locally, and so he supplies the logs for us, which has been really great to be able to have already an existing relationship with somebody who's doing ecological forest management locally, and be able to support him in the work he's doing and have it support our work. So that's been really great. And in addition to that, he, this year, for the first time, he came and harvested some logs from our land with me. Basically, I don't have felling in the forest experience. I have a fair amount of felling at the edge of a forest, but it's a whole different thing working to fell trees internally to the forest. And so he came and did some of that work here in the forest. I worked alongside him, and we bought those logs from him anyway, because basically the deal that we worked out was he would be kind of giving a landowner a stumpage fee for any wood that he took out of their land. So what he did was he felled some additional trees, kind of looking big picture at the forest, thinking in the long term of, the trees that are kind of subdominant and could come down for firewood. And so he felled a bunch of firewood and bucked it up and left it there for us, kind of as our quote unquote stumpage fee. So that was a cool thing that we worked out with him. Let's see. So you can see in the background there is a little low spot in the forest there. This forest was mined for sand maybe 100 years ago or so. So there's kind of this low pit, which actually is really great because our site is a little bit windy, but it makes it so that our log yard is a little bit protected from the wind, and the area where our actual log yard isn't wet. So the soil, being sand, drains very, very well. Our log yard is a little bit higher than this low wet spot that the sand was mined, and so now it's down to the clay layer, so it gets seasonally wet there, but we stay dry, which is great. So setting up for inoculation, our inoculation table we have right in the log yard. We used an old cold frame that we had put together ourselves, and took the glass off of it, and we were left with kind of a rectangular frame, and put it up on some sawhorses, and it was our inoculation table. It was perfect. So this is year one of drilling last year, getting going with inoculation. Similarly, our inoculation table is very clean. It does not look like that anymore. In the background there, you can see there is an A-frame set up. And one thing that was cool for us for year one was, because we had, our 350 logs are going to sit and incubate for the duration of 2017, but we had inoculated about 40 logs a couple years prior when I had done about a half acre of clearing around our house. So that was just kind of for fun. We weren't even thinking toward the enterprise yet. So we had 40 logs that last year we were able to separate into 7 soaking groups and manage kind of small scale. We were soaking like 6 logs a week. And that was really great for us for a number of reasons. It basically just allowed us to small scale trial the system and see that it worked. The whole soak logs and within a week get a flush thing was kind of elusive and mysterious, and part of me didn't even believe that it really worked, but it was really cool to experience it myself, and it allowed for playing with the harvest later on as well too, so that was great. So yeah, inoculation, we do, the standard thing that Steve teaches. We work with the angle grinder with a specialized bit. It's awesome. I love it. This is me here in the picture inoculating, or drilling rather. This is my business partner, Krista. Second station on the inoculation table. I thought this was kind of a funny picture to include because I think this is maybe our first batch, our first year of logs that we're inoculating. And at first we were kind of peeling apart the spore bloom layer around the outside of the bag of spawn and being like, what should we do with this? And it was a text to Steve that helped us learn that, no, you just, crumple it up and put it in there and use it in the inoculating. So that was helpful to learn. So waxing, we just got some nice shots. I have indeed been tempted by those expensive gadgets in the field and forest catalogs. The waxing tool that, it's only a couple $100 and it claims this and that, this many logs, but we've just kept it simple with a hot plate and a steaming pot of wax and the wax daubers for 25 cents a piece. And they do a pretty good job. So you can see down the table, there's kind of 3 stations. We've found that like 3 people, when you have one angle grinder, is 3 to 4 is like the perfect number for being really efficient for us. 1 person drilling at the end. The middle station, we can have 2 people facing each other with the inoculator stick. And then the last station is the waxing station. We struggled for a while with like, how do you get apart these big blocks of wax? But I just thought I'd mention that the thing that we came to that is really easy is a chisel. It's kind of a sad thing to do to a chisel if you're a woodworker, but a chisel, heat it up on the hot plate, stick it through that big block of wax, and it comes apart into blocks really easily. That was really nice to learn. Let's see. So here's a little photo of our other team member here. Last year, my daughter was in the log yard with us with her grandma a fair amount. It's sad that you can hear her crying in the background still. Her dad just came home though. So now in this picture, you can see the logs facing each other so that there's 2 stations of inoculation facing each other. We load up those logs on the table. We can drill 8 logs, pass them to the next person. We really like that setup. So having a small amount of mushrooms, it was a couple pounds a week, maybe a pound, 2 pounds that we were getting from those 7 logs. And it allowed us to kind of start playing. We played with our sales and markets a little bit. We got to purchase get samples of different types of packaging. We contacted packaging companies and got samples. So we got to put mushrooms in, see how they looked, how much fits in this size container, weigh it out, and see what we liked. And this is for retail. This is one of the things that we settled on, were these little wooden tills. This pint size fits about 1/4 pound. The quart fits about 1/2 pound. And we put our stamp right on there. I really like the visual of it. And so I think visually it for, fresh mushrooms kind of day of, it's very beautiful. And I think the mushrooms kind of can sell themselves this way. The drawbacks definitely are that they're going to dry out out of the fridge or even in the fridge if they're not then in a secondary container. So, I'm having to talk to, places when they're selling these for us, cold storage and transferring them to a container. And it's a little bit laborious, and I don't know if it makes sense in the long term. But this is also what we're putting them in for our Shiitake CSA members. So then I get to caretake them personally. And make sure that they're not drying out, which is a little bit of a chore, but worth it for now in terms of making sure that the mushrooms are the quality that I want them to be when they go home with the people who've bought them. So last year, we were also really successful doing holiday log sales, and we got into 1 full weekend long holiday market and then 3 one-day markets. And one thing that was really interesting, some like learnings, we didn't start looking at for fairs to get into until like maybe September, and it was kind of late. We had missed some deadlines. We had we needed to like just get the application in like the following week. And one of the things that everyone requires every application is like mock table setups of your display, which, you know, kind of sent us scrambling to like set up our display and figure it all out, which was nice to have it set up ahead of time for the actual fair. But I never would have known. So that was a learning process for us. But yeah, you can see our little setup here. It was really, really fun to like make the table beautiful with different logs, the ones with the gorgeous lichen on them, and tie them with bows. And one amazing thing happened at one holiday fair where it was mid-November and we got an oyster flush. And so we had logs on the table with oysters on them, which was just like that was our weekend long fair. And it was wonderfully synchronistic. Again, they kind of sold themselves. And so you can see there, we sold them for $22 a piece, or a set for $40. And it was really fun sending people home with their holiday logs. Watching people walk around the fair kind of cradling their mushroom log was really, really fun. And other people enjoyed it too. People were talking about it throughout the course of the day. The other thing that was really great about the holiday log enterprise is kind of an enterprise in and of itself. You know, there were application fees, and so there were costs associated with it, buying the ribbons. But the cool thing about the income from it was that it made it so that the year one output of financial capital for supplies was paid for, plus a little bit more. So that was great. We sold out of holiday logs. And we're excited about it. We're going to continue doing that. And the one market is excited to have us back, and we're going to try to get in a couple more markets. So this year, back in the mushroom yard, it was year one of being a mom. I was a new mom last year. So it was a pretty big feat to like start this enterprise, and it was not at all without the huge help of my mom as grandma. But you can see there we had some kind of early cold strain mushrooms come in that we're all holding in our hands. So we're in production now, and it's really interesting. Every week has varied so much for us in terms of I'm finding it really interesting how the mushrooms look really different every week depending on the weather. It's not even really a strain to strain thing is what we've been finding. It really seems like it's the weather that makes the mushrooms look a certain way each week. There's certainly some that have a distinct like more fatness or something, but really seems like the weather changes them each week, whether it's more humid or raining or dry. Very interesting. Actually, let me just tell you a couple of the things that we a couple of changes that we made this year to our inoculation was we made sure that every time we did it, we were doing at least 5-hour chunks. Last year, we kind of did it in dribs and drabs, and with all of the setup and breakdown, I think we lost a lot of time by doing like 3-hour, 2-hour chunks. So 5-hour chunks was really our sweet spot. By the time we were like, oh, we just want to finish this bag, and it was getting to be like 6 hours, we were usually kind of loopy by then. That was on the advice of Steve, that 5 hours was really a sweet spot, and we found that to be true as well. And we had a 3-member team every time we inoculated, at least. And the times that we had 4, it seemed like we were really cranking. So two people was just kind of slow. 3 and 4 was really great. Let's see. So this is kind of Big picture of our laying yard. We have our 7 soaking groups. It's a little bit hard to see, but there's a line here that's 7 soaking groups. And there's a line here. This is this year's inoculated logs, last year's inoculated logs. Our holiday logs are here. Can you all see my cursor when I move it? I think you can.
Yeah, we can.
Cool. The other thing that I'll point out is the way that we've been doing labeling. You can see all the colored tags on the ends. We have used different colors of electrical tape. So each color represents a different strain of mushroom, electrical tape, a staple, and that is our identification system. Since we're only soaking 1 year's worth, we're soaking year 1's mushrooms, we haven't yet implemented the system for year 1 versus year 2 mushroom logs. We have them kind of spatially separated right now in the mushroom yard, but next year when we're soaking 2 years worth of mushrooms, we're basically planning on using a different color code of thumbtacks. So color coding is where it's at for us. The electrical tape is really fast and it's really inexpensive. Basically, we have 2 years worth, and we're probably, not even halfway done with a roll of electrical tape. So we've been happy with that. We'll see if they start falling off. We'll have to loop back around in a couple years to see if they're still sticking around. Let's see. So soaking logs, we just happen to have this tub. I know Steve doesn't so much like these metal tubs anymore, but this is kind of like it's like the double size of what your like mini trough is. And it's really nice because it fits 2 sets of logs in kind of lengthwise. And 1 full soaking group fits in here. So we can get, 30 or so logs in this trough, which is really nice. Our water source it just kind of, I honestly didn't even think of this system until after we decided we were going to be setting up our log yard in this location. But, 100 feet away from where we're doing the soaking, 2 hose lengths worth, there is kind of an old hand dug well with really clear cold water. And we have a generator and a sump pump, and that brings our water over to our soaking tub each week. So I feel like we kind of just lucked out having that kind of old resource from previous generations waiting there for us. So here you can see our A-frame right next to our soaking tub. The shade cloth is definitely really important for us because we don't have any conifers. It's a hardwood forest. So you can see the dappled light kind of shining through there. We lost a big cottonwood tree, so a little bit of sun opened up in the log yard in the last year. So the shade cloth is important for us. And we do have our logs laying right on the ground. I really liked Mariann's setup. I think that we'll be changing that over time because just this morning, it's been raining a whole bunch here, and the bottom mushrooms that are touching the ground always have the most bugs in them. With the rain, it was splashing dirt up on those bottom mushrooms. So we lost a lot of mushrooms to ones that I wouldn't even call grade C for drying because they're totally full of dirt. It's hard to get the dirt out of the gills. So I think that's something that needs further developing for us. So we've been doing harvest and cleaning out, kind of tapping out the bugs and grading right in the mushroom yard, and really enjoying that. There was a time in the beginning where I would, kind of quickly go over all of the logs, cut them all off, put them in their bowls, and then bring them inside to then grade and tap out the bugs. And this just kind of simplified it to not have to handle them all twice was really nice for me, a good development. So we now are happily just grading the mushrooms right in the log yard. There's a little picture of our thrift situation. And then the packing for our various markets, we've been using these rectangular plastic tubs. Each one fits about 2 pounds. And so we've just been kind of stacking them up right there on the A-frame and loading them in. These are actually reused containers. My dad owns a cheese shop, so these are containers that halva gets packed in, so they're cleaned and we reuse them. We've actually been sending mushrooms in these containers to restaurants, to the co-op, and attempting to get them back. So that's been interesting too, because it's a free source for us. We haven't had to invest in buying these containers, so we've been trying to rotate them out. But I definitely have way more containers out than I have containers in right now. So that's something that I think requires further consideration. So the main markets that we have right now are shiitake CSA. So we have a handful of members who come and pick up shiitakes right from the farm, which has been really fun. We have our local food co-op right in town, and they basically will take everything that we can bring them each week. I think overall at this point, for grade A, we do have more demand than supply, which is good and bad in a way, because I want to be able to bring everybody all the mushrooms that they want, but I can't yet. So it's a little bit of a hard place to be, but hopefully a good place to be as we grow, as long as people can be understanding. Working with the local restaurants has been really interesting. We don't have any standing orders yet, and it's been interesting to, we've been having the really gorgeous ones, but they have like the minor cosmetic defect. So I would call that a grade B. We've been bringing those mixed in with grade A to the restaurants. So it's valuable to us to have some place to bring those mushrooms with a little cosmetic defect. And there's weeks where I haven't, all 3 of the restaurants that we've been bringing them to have said, no, we're good this week. So that's a little bit of a challenge. Whereas this week, of course, we have a lower supply than because of the rain and the slug damage. And I already know I have a restaurant who wants 3 pounds, but I'm not sure I have 3 pounds for them. So it's a bit of a bummer. And then also we have a couple of farms who have been willing to partner with us in various ways and have our shiitakes in with them. Some have been willing to do add-on shares. Some have been willing to have our mushrooms just in their coolers at their pickup. Some want us to show up and sit there with our mushrooms during their CSA day. Some people have even purchased our mushrooms and included it in their CSA for people who have said that they were interested in mushrooms. So that was cool. But I would say, again, those are all opportunities that can be further developed when we have more supply. So that's That's it. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you, Steve, for all of your support and for helping us get off the ground and giving us the opportunity to share with y'all.
Awesome. Thanks so much. We have some questions in the queue here, so let's get through those. And if folks have other questions or comments at this point, it'd be great to get them in the chat box as we wind down here. Really some great, lots of great little tidbits and information. Really appreciate both of you sharing that process. And I learned a bunch of little things. I'm excited to think about our racks as well, and also about a much easier way to chop up those blocks of wax. So that was awesome. Michael's asking, and I believe this was back in Mariann's, but potentially be both of you to answer, if you have a sense of your anticipated gross revenue for the mushroom enterprise this year.
Yeah, so this is Mariann. I wish I could say I had a handle on that, but I probably won't be able to look at those numbers until, well, I just haven't done it yet. Last year, when we had about half the number of mushrooms we do now, I think we did just over $2,000 just gross sales. And again, we had a number of mushrooms that we didn't sell last year, and we're trying to do a better job of marketing more of that this year. So maybe about twice that.
Yeah, and for us, I know last year, our gross revenue last year, not really selling very many mushrooms themselves, but logs was, I think it was about 1,700. And this year, I don't have an anticipated gross. I would say that it's going to be lower than, well, I did have a projected gross, but I'm not going to share that necessarily because I think that it's going to be lower than that. I think overall our production is lower than I had anticipated.
Okay, great, thanks. And so Michelle and Bob are asking how long the inoculated logs were for the holiday fair, Dyami.
How long what? What was the question?
So how long are the logs that you were selling at the holiday fairs?
Oh yeah, like length.
Mm-hmm.
They're half-size logs. So basically every log in your log yard gets cut in half and produces 2 mushroom logs, holiday logs rather.
Cool. And were those new logs, or were they ready to fruit right away, or they needed to sit for a while before they were ready?
So we inoculated them in the spring of 2017. We sold them in the fall of 2017. So what we were telling people was that they would start fruiting this spring.
Cool. Okay, great. Alrighty. Mariann's asking me about, Jami mentioned some feelings I had around metal tanks. So I'll just explain that. I don't have any problem with metal tanks per se, just what I found is those galvanized steel ones tend to eventually rust, and you get that rust introduced to the water. And that's not necessarily problematic, but you know, from a water quality standpoint, it's not ideal. So we've just personally on our farm moved from those to either the plastic ones, or we've been able to get a hand on some stainless steel tanks, which is awesome. If you can find old maple sugaring operations or old dairy operations, sometimes you can get those. They're not necessarily cheap, but sometimes you can luck across them, and those are going to last longer than you. So those are the ideal ones. We like the plastic ones. The galvanized ones also can leak over time, but you can definitely fix them pretty easily. So so those are just our preferences. But I agree, and I like I used to have one of those double length long ones. I really like that for the size. So yeah. All right, comment from Michelle and Bob. They use plastic tabs that come on bakery products, different colors for different strains. So that's a great other idea to mark those logs and color code them. So just gotta get your bakery fix in to make sure you get enough tags. Jacob's asking a couple questions. Jacob's wondering if maybe either of you have tested your water. and thought about that, and also how much time do you find the mushrooms can be in the cooler before the quality degrades?
Yeah, so I did have our water tested this year, and of course the soaking water only has to meet irrigation standards, but that the tests, this has actually been a bit of a challenge to figure out which tests we're supposed to have done for these, but I ended up doing a total coliform and E. coli on the water, and it came back fine. And again, that's the well water that we use.
I didn't have this particular well water tested, but there's kind of some larger water testing that's been going on in our neighborhood. So I've kind of been riding on that a little bit. What was the other question? Oh, keeping shelf life. I am finding that when storing the mushrooms with a loose fitted lid, that well, here's the thing, it kind of depends on the mushroom for that week. If it like got really wet in rains, or rather last week it wasn't even rains, it was really humid, so the mushrooms were much more moist, and so those I feel like those keep more like a week, whereas the other ones might keep more like 10 days. And it also depends on storage. Loose fitting lid really makes a difference.
Yeah, I also think about a week on ours, and what I'll do a lot of times is before I put the lid on the containers, I'll just lay a clean paper towel across the top to try and absorb some of the droplets of water that accumulate. I try not to keep them for longer than a week, though, at least the ones I'm going to sell, just to try and keep fresh mushrooms in stock.
All right, and let's see, Michael's asking if any idea of how many person hours have gone into your the revenues you were quoting and thinking about.
This is Mariann. No, I don't have that number. We really only started tracking person hours this year, so I will be getting a handle on that. I fully expect that it's probably going to end up paying us 5 cents an hour or something like that at the end.
I don't know those numbers right off the top of my head. I have a sense of inoculation, but since we're soaking and harvesting this year for the first time, I don't have like a full year's worth of numbers yet.
All right, someone's asking about lots of mushrooms with nibble bits on them and what could be causing that. I'll throw out there that if you see teeth marks, that's often some kind of forest rodent like chipmunk, red squirrel, often nibble but don't really bite. So that could be a possibility. If by nibble you mean like a round hole or something that actually goes all the way through the mushroom, it's most likely a slug pulling through there. So yeah. And Susan's asking if logs don't fruit after 2 weeks, what should I do? Do I put them back in the lanyard and soak them when their turn comes up? She's had poor production as of yet, just a few logs producing after what seems like it should be a good amount of incubation. Likely, usually, and we find this depending on the species, often the first year, they're not quite ready sometimes the first time you soak them. They might take longer to incubate. And we found this with, for instance, hop hornbeam. Last year, every time we soaked the first round of logs, it was almost a dud every time. And then the second round, they really kicked into gear. And this year, they're actually really looking good. So it could be they're not quite ready yet. What I'd recommend is you just kind of cycle them back through the rotation and give them the proper rest period. But it never hurts to soak the logs. You can never kind of over soak them. So if you feel like you want to try them sooner than that, you're by all means able to do that without any concern for anything. And then a couple more questions here. Katie's asking where we get our shade cloth from. Curious where you all, Dyami and Mariann, if you've sourced those materials from any places. We've often gotten ours locally from old greenhouses or folks who have greenhouse operations or nurseries. We can get it secondhand, and we've also bought some online just in rolls. Often if you buy it in bulk, it's a little bit cheaper than if you buy like individual sheets. But any thoughts on where you source those things?
Yeah, this is Dyami. We ordered it online, I think Greenhouse Megastore, and it was in bulk, so it's a little smaller price per pound. But that's cool to know that you can get it secondhand. I'll have to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and this is Mariann. I also went online. I think I got mine through Johnny's seed company. Also on the roll, though. I think that works nicely.
Great, and then a couple more here. Michael's asking if there's a rule of thumb for person hours per pound, and it's kind of complicated on that end. There's a little bit of information on the cornellmushroom.org website under economics, and again, we're kind of updating that with some different numbers and some updates, but we've mostly looked at labor hours per log in terms of management because yields can vary. So we haven't looked at it per pound of yield because that's a variable that's hard to know, but we know what it takes to produce a pound. So on that website, you can find some basic numbers. You can also find more detailed information in the Best Management Practices Guide, which is a free downloadable guide on the website, and also some in the most recent guide. So I'll leave it with that, and I'm happy I could dig deeper, but I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. So we know that the vast majority of labor goes into the inoculation process, as I think both of our speakers underscored, and certainly is the bulk of the labor. And marketing is the big variable, like and deliveries and sort of how long it takes you to get to those places can be another big factor. All right, and then Brett's asking, has anyone experienced birds eating out the spawn of inoculated logs? I'm curious if Dyami or Mariann, if you had experience with any of the kind of empty holes in the logs that you've placed in the lane yard.
We have experienced that. This is Dyami, and we find that they get to it if we're slow on the shade cloth, and once the shade cloth is over them, they leave them alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've also had a few of those come in, and yeah, the shade cloth is instrumental. But I also find that they pretty much stick to just the holes that are kind of on the top side, outside of the stacks. And even when they've gotten into those, it doesn't seem to us, it doesn't seem to have affected production. The logs still seem to do fine.
Yeah, and I think what's key there is that it's most important that the spawn remains in the log during the first 1 to 2 months after inoculation. Once the mycelium has sort of transitioned from the sawdust or plug to the log, then it actually theoretically can be eaten out and be fine. So it's especially important the first couple months to make sure they're covered, or if you're concerned about birds or you find that to be a problem, because and as Mariann said, if the log's only partially consumed, then or there's just 1 or 2 holes, and often it's not usually a big factor on production, but certainly something that we hear about very commonly, and would definitely recommend the shade cloth or some kind of cover as a practice to really keep that pressure down. All right, and Susan's mentioned she uses burlap for shade cloth. Is that okay? I would say it depends on the burlap. If it's too thick and doesn't dry out well, it can be a problem. Because what will happen is, especially in the soaking rains that a lot of folks are having recently, it'll keep the logs really moist, and that can breed some other kind of surface fungi or mold or something. So we had some problems with that in the past, but if it's thin enough and it seems like it dries out, I think the big advantage of the shade cloth is it tends to dry out really quickly, and so it doesn't persist in terms of holding moisture. And Michelle and Bob are mentioning that they've had problems with honeybees eating spawn, so they keep them covered as well. So I think the shade cloth all around is an important factor. We are right at 2, so I want to honor everyone's time and thank both Mariann and Dyami for your time and energy. Really appreciate the presentations and for sharing about your enterprises. So thanks so much. Thanks, folks, for joining. As I mentioned, I'll follow up with an email with a link to the recording, which we'll post hopefully later today or tomorrow. And be on the lookout for future events. And again, I'll be announcing these additional training sessions as they're launched and all the kind of new stuff that's coming down the road in the early fall and probably into fall, because it seems like things always take a little longer than we hope. So thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Stay dry, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Steve. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye now.